Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. I know that we are spread out all over the world, which is exciting. My name is Kristen, and I am the North American Opportunities Manager with the Career Center in St. Andrews. I'm located in St. Andrews, and that is where I'm coming to you from this morning. Well, your morning, some of your mornings, it's my evening. We are here today and we're talking about expanding opportunities in uncertain times. And so we have three alumni who are here who are going to be talking to us about their stories about navigating uncertainty, about what that looks like in their career, and what advice they might have for you moving forward. So how we're going to do this is we're going to have them introduce themselves. I have a few questions for them to kind of get us started on what we're talking about, and to give them an opportunity to share their story and to share their insights. And then we will take questions from you all. So feel free to jump in, ask a question. Because we have a fairly small group, you can either feel free to just say it out loud. We can kind of take a raise of hands, if you will. Or there is a chat box at the bottom of Zoom, and so you can add it into the chat box, and then we can read them out and ask our panelists in that way. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. So Ellie, would you mind introducing yourself, who you are, where you're at, and a little bit about your story of navigating uncertainty?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Kristen, and thank you all for joining. It is lovely to be here, so to speak. My name's Ellie Hearn, and I'm the founder of Penciler Inc., a leadership communications agency based in New York City. We do three things: leadership coaching, so sort of individualized coaching for people in the corporate world. We also do workshops and facilitations for groups within companies, and we do a lot of work around culture and internal communication. So that's what I do. I got my degree from St. Andrews in 2007 in international relations, and I actually started my career in IR here in New York, although I'm actually from Scotland. I don't sound very Scottish. I was born in Ireland, but I grew up near Dundee. And the reason I mention that is I was looking for a job in New York, and I didn't have a visa, and the Great Recession was right on the horizon by the time I actually did get some traction in my job search. So that's my sort of brush with uncertainty beyond what we're all living through at the moment, and pivoting my company accordingly. So I would say that for those of you tuning in, I think getting involved with the Career Center and taking part in events like this is a great first step. In terms of, just quickly, and I know we'll get into more of this later, but things that I found helpful right from the get-go were working on relationships, considering what my sort of more stable career options were in the light of the economic situation versus more risky ones. And I think for each of us, we have to decide what we're more comfortable with. It could be, working for a government, working for a really well-funded organization or business is the way to go. That ended up, short version is, that helped me a lot in 2007, 2008. Or maybe there's an argument for being a bit more entrepreneurial and looking at more of a startup, which might be a bit more risky, but there could be bigger reward there as well. And I think one sort of overarching thing for me looking back is most people's career paths are somewhat non-linear. So try not to feel, okay, my next move is the move and I have to have it all figured out and everything will be perfect, because that's not realistic, and you tend to learn more when you do it the harder way, I guess. That's a really negative note to end my answer on, but it's good to be here.
Well, I think the message of thinking in a non-linear fashion in your career is actually a really positive thing. I think it provides lots of possibilities in a career. So thanks, Ellie. Appreciate that. Richard, do you mind going next?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. So my name is Richard Woodhull. I graduated in 2007, and I'm an investment officer at the United States International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC for short. And prior to January of this year, it used to be known by a different acronym, OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And we're a development bank, so we have a mandate to do investments that return capital to the US taxpayer, but also goals to achieve positive development objectives in emerging markets where we work. So similar to the CDC in the UK, which is the UK equivalent, or the International Finance Corporation, which is the part of the World Bank that works with the private sector, we're a similar entity of the US government that fills that role. So we work with over 100 countries globally and manage a $25 billion portfolio. My role as an investment officer involves evaluating projects, conducting due diligence, preparing investment recommendations to our credit investment committees, and kind of walking a deal through from the beginning, early look stage to providing that financing. My story with uncertainty, I graduated in 2007, same as Ellie, and was lucky to have a strong job market then. I took an initial offer with PwC in London and then their transaction services group. And that started in September after I graduated. And I had a few months to figure out what to do with my summer before kind of committing to that full-time role. And just through networking, I actually kind of came across a St. Andrews alum who was at the World Bank. And I ended up getting an internship to fill those summer months before starting my full-time career at the World Bank. Starting my career at PwC. And so I started that job for a little less than a year before quickly realizing I had no interest in being a chartered accountant. It wasn't for me. That was not my career path. And really wanted to get back more in the international development side of things, what I had done over the summer. And so I quit that job, moved to Cambodia, started working in unpaid internship with the United Nations. And soon after that, Lehman Brothers collapsed, the Great Recession kind of started, and I quickly had those kind of feelings of doubt and uncertainty. Was that the right choice? Why did I leave this great, stable, well-paying job in London? And so certainly it became a more challenging job market. I eventually kind of moved back to where I am in Washington, D.C. now. And there were a lot of times where I had to grasp with, should I just take the first available job that I can get, anything, or should I hold out and try and wait for something that I know I really want and that I'm passionate about? And I think that's will be a challenge that everybody may have to grapple with, of how do you prioritize what you want versus what's available in this market, and certainly happy to talk more to that. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Richard. And Matt, give us
Hey, how's it going? My name is Matthew Adams. I was a graduating class of 2014. Currently, I'm a financial advisor with the Princeton Group based here in Philly. We're a independent asset management firm with about $1 billion assets under management based locally in Philadelphia. My story with uncertainty is I always knew I wanted to get into banking and finance. So I figured, I got into St. Andrews, I'll work hard, I'll get a spring internship, then I'll get a summer internship, and then I'll get the full-time job. Turns out, if you're an American trying to apply for a job in the UK, sometimes it can be difficult with internships and trying to get it. So my summer internship that I thought I was going to get, I was at final round, so I was beaten out by other people. And I didn't really have too much to go for. So I said, all right, I want to do banking. I can't get a banking internship, so what do? So I expanded what I thought I wanted to do. And it turns out I went into international aid, just like Richard, in similar areas. So instead of working in a nice air-conditioned office in London, I ended up working in a refugee camp in Jamena, Chad, working in their economics team for a company called CARE International. And turns out when I came back and after I finished that and I was doing economic research and doing boots on the ground, I came back as a skill set. So when I applied for working with banks, it turns out that those skill sets that I learned were just as valuable as actually sitting and working with people. So I guess my thought is in certain times, be a little bit flexible, but still have that ultimate goal and see how you can change the story into what you're looking for. So thanks again.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. So I have a few questions for our panelists here, and I'd love to start with Ellie. So Ellie, part of your role is working with all kinds of different companies. One of the things that I'm sure on everyone's mind is what actually is happening and what is what kind of trends are happening within these organizations that you're working with? And so my question is, what things are you seeing from the organizations you're working with in terms of their status, their hiring, their trends, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, I should start by saying, and this won't surprise you, but no two organizations are the same in how they're dealing with this, but I can definitely share some anecdotal examples from different industries and sectors. And I would say initially I worked with a lot of HR teams as my sort of entry point into a company. And from there I could work with the leaders, I could work with new hires, or really anyone in between. And working with those HR leaders initially, what I would see in US clients and clients around the world, depending where they were in sort of the COVID arc, if you like, initially there was this sort of, well, we're working from home for a while, and there was a little bit of novelty to that, seeing each other's houses and whatever books they put out to make themselves look smart and educated. And then it sort of pivoted to, oh, well, now we're going to have to do some reshuffling. And that was true of smaller companies and startups that weren't, making PPE or working directly on things where they would be, relatively financially protected. And I've seen some hiring freezes, some kind of pivots to approaches to hiring. So maybe they're, hiring more for particular roles than they might otherwise. And obviously I'm talking about a lot of different organizations, so it's hard to speak in specific terms. But other things that I've noticed is companies are really investing in the people they're keeping around. Like, let's set these people up with some training and invest in them because they're working longer hours, or now they're going above and beyond in ways that we hadn't asked them to before. In terms of specific industries, insurance, various finance companies seem to be really making a lot of investments in their people. Nonprofits, government, if their funding sources are strong, which is a big if, but companies that have a lot of government funding, or organizations, I should say, seem to be doing better. And I'm quite sure my co-panelists could speak a lot more intelligently on matters of finance, so I'll leave that to them. But those are organizations I've seen that seem to be doing a little bit better. That being said, that may not last forever. And definitely as these changes filter through, and as governments and what's the word I'm looking for? Philanthropic funds decide, okay, this is what this looks like longer term. This is how we're going to pivot our approach to funding. And that will start to evolve as well. And part of the reason I've zeroed in on those organizations is when I got my first kind of paying real job in 2008, that was working for a nonprofit here in New York called the International Peace Institute. And amidst everything that was going on, they were hiring because they had a lot of different sources of funding, primarily from governments. And that meant a lot more stability. They were also much more inclined to sponsor visas in a way that a lot of private sector companies weren't. Pivoting, 12 years into the present, so to speak. I'm also seeing, some companies kind of putting things on hold for a while, letting people go. Elephant in the room, it's definitely happening. But there is a lot to make me hopeful. Like, I've definitely seen companies that are more sort of tech startup inclined seem to be getting a little bit more creative in terms of their approach to this. And I think one thing that will be really positive amidst a lot of negative stuff that's going on is, in times like these, and that's a term I'm really growing to hate, but in times like these, people do tend to get a bit more entrepreneurial and start things. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is thinking maybe a bit more outside of the box than a job title or a specific organization. And so depending on your level of risk in terms of a job or your next step, would be thinking through, well, where are their funding sources and where do they fall kind of in this supply chain of necessity, might not be the right word, but perhaps thinking a little bit more about how does this organization or this role fit within a larger picture. Can be interesting. Great, that's super helpful. Thanks, Ellie. Richard or Matthew, do you have anything to add to that from what you're seeing in your roles?
Sorry, I could just add that we are looking at the effects mostly on our downstream investment portfolio. All of our investments are in emerging markets, and each one is being affected differently. Particularly, my portfolio has a lot of financial institutions in it. So understanding how loans, how mortgages are being repaid, and how that's going to ultimately roll up to microfinance banks, traditional banks, and what will happen there, whether they'll be able to maintain portfolio quality or whether banks will have to consolidate or get government assistance in certain markets. My organization itself, as Ellie kind of mentioned, being a government agency, we're pretty insulated from short-term impacts on our organization. We are actually continuing to grow at the moment, and still, I think, hopefully still having a summer internship program. So I think we're a bit more insulated than others, and I've been lucky in that respect.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with exactly like that. There is one industry that is going to continue to hire and will be hiring going forward, is the U.S. government. So if you're looking for a way to kind of get in to a specific niche area, getting into a government work, the U.S. government is massive when it comes to different areas, and these guys are going to keep on hiring. And as Richard said, they're pretty insulated. It's a great way to get experience. And as I kind of talked about with my story, is be flexible. Be flexible with what you're looking for and seeing how you can find, applicable skills. I didn't know that I was going to work as an aid worker. Didn't know I was going to work as a headhunter. But both of those skills have now, in my current role, are pretty much used every day. So find the transferable skills, but still have that goal of where you want to get to. There's going to be a lot of industries in the U.S. I know banking and finance are making hires in this period, particularly at the regional level. So you might have to go a little bit more local, be a little bit more flexible with your location, but you're definitely going to be okay.
On that note, Matthew, I'm wondering, one of the things that you, and I've heard you speak about quite a bit, is this transferable skills, exactly what you were just talking about. I'm wondering, can you speak a little bit to how do transferable skills work, and how do you take a seemingly maybe separate skill set, it's like, oh, that was very specific skill set, and apply it to another role? What does that look like? How do you go about thinking through that, or what is that process like? Why is that important?
The way that I always kind of think of it is you want to play to your natural strengths of what you think that you're good at, what you enjoy doing, and try to work to build on that in a professional level. For example, I'm quite an extrovert person. I have no problem meeting new people. I enjoy speaking. I enjoy talking to new groups. So that naturally lends to networking. So when I was networking as a headhunter, that's how I received most of my clients, was just by going out there, getting to know people, getting to talk to them. As that transition now into banking, now my role is more in business development. So all those people that I knew from headhunting are now my clients as a financial advisor. And you can just kind of transfer and kind of look and play to your skills a little bit more. So, going to when I was back in Chad, one of my jobs was doing economic analysis for grant sponsorships from different US companies, different French companies, and different Canadian companies. And I never thought that grant writing would be such a big deal until I started working with organizations that specialized in that. And they needed help with that. And they needed to find the right people who did that. So when I was headhunting for economic analysts, having that grant work, because I knew it, was the transferable skill to help me help those businesses further.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Ellie or Richard, do you have anything to add to transferable skills? You've made significant leaps in both of your careers. And I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I could just say quickly, I think in my job, there is a very specific skill set that we look for that most people probably don't have right outside of undergrad. So ability to do financial statement analysis, financial modeling, work with CEOs of companies to conduct interviews, understand how their business works, and identify risks. Those are things that you can learn and you will learn in your jobs and your career. One of the things that I think is most important when we're hiring somebody that doesn't necessarily have that experience yet is, particularly for an intern program, are you demonstrating an ability to kind of learn on the job, to be proactive in finding work and doing that work on your own and learning as you go? Because I think particularly this summer, as internships may become that were originally intended to be in an office may become virtual, one of the challenges I know my colleagues have is that it takes a long time to get somebody up to speed on our internal processes and systems. And if we're going to make that, I guess, investment in an intern, they want to know that the time that we're spending to get them up and running is going to be worth it. And anything you can do to make that process easier to hit the ground running is what's going to convince me to hire an intern versus not hire an intern. So particularly this summer, where a lot of that may have to be over video calls or non-traditional means, making that pitch that I can hit the ground running on day one, whether that's in your cover letter saying this is a particular interest, that I can do this deliverable, conduct this research. You could be very specific in making suggestions about what you can bring and what your deliverable for that summer will be with internships this summer. So those are kind of my thoughts on how things might be different this summer.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and add a couple of things in terms of transferable skills too. One is, while technical skills are incredibly important, especially at the beginning of your career, it's usually more sort of relational skills that are what people get hired and kept around and promoted for, and sometimes let go for if they don't have them. So thinking about whatever you've done, whatever your experience, even if you haven't had a sort of career job yet, and it's just your resume is mostly your education and extracurricular things, or maybe even an internship or, you know, a part-time job in a supermarket, whatever it may be, really emphasizing your sort of human or soft skills will help you stand out. And the other thing I would say, just in terms of how to think about this and how to tease out what the transferable skills are, is by asking yourself, and this is a communications tool that we use with some of our clients, but by saying, okay, who's your audience? So for this particular role, maybe it's a hiring manager, maybe it's an HR person at a particular company, and what do they care about? Like, you have a job description, you can look at online, research the culture of the company and their values and everything else, and then say to yourself, okay, if, you know, this particular audience could only remember 3 things about each role on my resume, or 3 things about me, what are those 3 things? And then how can I use those to sort of refine what I put on my LinkedIn profile, what's on my Saint Connect profile, what's on my resume? And then it's, you know, people remember less, right? Less is more. And they tend not to remember too many more than 3 things about anything, which is mildly depressing. But in terms of resumes, we all know they're not looking at them for long. So ask yourself what those 3 things are, and that will help you pull out what's most relevant to that next opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Richard, I want to go back to you. And one of the things you said in your introduction was figuring out the right opportunity to take. And you have experience or have had your hand in unpaid internships and getting offers from bigger companies and smaller companies, government organizations, all that kind of stuff. Can you talk about what is the way that you discern on what path to go down or what to be taking, particularly in a time like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unpaid internships are tough. They're a tough reality, though, in the sense that internships that may have previously been paid may become unpaid now. They're not for everybody. Everybody has their own unique challenges of what they can afford and what they consider will pay off for them in the long run. So for me, I think I evaluated opportunities on what is the return on this internship experience for me, even if I'm not getting paid right now. And so I spent my entire graduate program doing an MBA here in Washington, D.C., also doing an unpaid internship. And for me, the calculus was, okay, I think there are 2 things I would look at. Like, is there a high potential or likelihood that this will transition to a full-time paid offer when it's over? If not, that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it. But I think for me, it was kind of a question of, are you gaining a very specific skill set that you wouldn't otherwise get, that you can then transfer when you leave? Or in my particular situation, I was working with and doing deals with all of the people that I would hope would be my potential employer someday. So I was making that network, meeting those contacts in this role. So if they did go on to hire me, if they hadn't, I was hopeful that I was going to meet my potential employer through the network that I was gaining in that job. it's challenging for smaller organizations that maybe don't have formal graduate employment schemes or formal internship opportunities. Because I was trying to get into impact investing very early on when there were less people doing it and was kind of a new topic, the program I was in had career opportunities that were more around traditional finance, going to the big banks, going to Google, going to all these massive corporations that do have those formal programs. But I knew I wanted to be in something where most of my employers were 5, 10-person teams. They aren't advertising on LinkedIn. They don't come to campus to recruit. So I had to kind of go out there and do my own career treks, where I went to New York and I went to San Francisco, and I connected with the alumni that I could, but also just cold calling, introducing yourself to people and saying, hi, this is what I'm interested in. I really enjoy what you're doing in your job. Would you be interested in taking 15 minutes and having a coffee with me? Informational interviews where you're not asking for anything other than to hear their story. And I think if people like their jobs, they're generally really interested in telling you about them and happy to help, in my experience. And that time that I did that, I met with, I think almost everybody I met with told me they didn't have formal internship opportunities that year. And in the end, I ended up getting 3 offers from people that had told me they weren't going to have internship programs. So I think the point there is that making those contacts are valuable, because in the future, if something does open up, they already know you. They know you went that extra mile to introduce yourself. You're less risky to them than somebody who is just a resume in a pile. So I think it's depending on where you're looking and whether it's a small firm versus a big firm. If it's a smaller firm, I would just say that opportunities are not going to fall in your lap. You may not see them advertised. You need to go out there and make your own opportunities. So it's about being proactive, especially in this environment, I would say.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. I'm also wondering, can you speak to a little bit, should students be taking their first open door that they get? Why or why not?
Yeah, I don't have a positive, a strict yes or no on that. I think for me, I took a lot of opportunities where I wasn't quite sure if I was going to like them or not. And then I think early on in your career, you don't necessarily know what you want to do or what you're good at, or where those two things overlap. And so I think you have the opportunity now, while you're straight out of university, to try a lot of things. We're not in an era where people work for the same organization for the rest of their lives. You have an opportunity to see where your skill set matches with different types of jobs. So I think from that perspective, it's not necessarily a harm to take something that's maybe not your perfect dream job. I think nowadays everyone wants to do something where they feel that they have a positive impact in their job, in their life, in their career. But sometimes we also just need to pay the bills. So, I mean, I think opportunities where you're gaining skill sets that can then transfer with you, like we had talked about earlier, I think those are the kind of ones you should be prioritizing. And then it's just a personal decision there, from how badly do I need a job now? What is the market looking like? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? So hard to give you a clear yes or no on that.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Thank you. One of the things you were talking about there, Richard, was the best way to, or some of the best ways to appropriately connect with alumni. We hear from our students that, yes, we know that our alumni are important in our career journeys. We know that they're doing interesting things, but to make the step from I know that to I'm making a connection can sometimes be challenging. So Ellie and Matt, I want to throw it over to you to give yourselves a chance to answer that. What would you say is the best way to be reaching out and connecting with alumni, perhaps even in this time where we're being asked to stay away from each other? Yeah, can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So just a little bit of background. I run the Philadelphia alumni group for St. Andrews. I started it 2 years ago. There wasn't really a formal group in place, but I just reaching out to people on LinkedIn, said, hi, I'm Matthew Adams, I'm a student, or I was a student. I'd love to start an alumni group. Is this of interest? I sent 200 messages one night, and I had about 150 responses that following morning saying,
Wow.
I've been dying to get together with people. The alumni network in St. Andrews and the bond that you have by having St. Andrews is so strong. If you just write a LinkedIn message to somebody, where you find their email, you see that they went to St. Andrews, and you write a message just saying, hi, my name's Matt. I saw that you work for, let's just say, Bank of America, and I'm interested in, applying there. I'd love to chat with you a little bit. Would you mind sitting down and telling me about the corporation? Just as Richard said he did. And the answer is, I'm speaking for the other alumni. Pretty much everybody would take the meeting, and nobody's going to throw you out of the room and say that's ridiculous. Everybody's going to want to talk to you. The alumni group are very, very happy to be a bit nostalgic as well about their times. And they were one too. I was the student looking for the job. It's not too bad to just reach out through LinkedIn, through email, just to check in with people. I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times somebody's going to want to speak with you, or at least try to make a connection.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just chime in there as well. I think we hear so much about networking, especially when you're about to graduate or you're looking for a job or at a point in your career where you really need something. And it's kind of a scary word. Like to Kristen's point, we know the community's there and we've been hearing that we should network, but it can feel like a big leap to take that step, especially if you're not a natural networker or you're not, as extroverted. It can be a little bit intimidating. So for me, a really helpful thing was to consider it more making connections, learning from other people, listening to people. And that tends to go over very well with people beyond just them being excited to chat to someone who has more recent stories of St. Andrews, this sort of town that we all share and university that we all share. It tends to go over really well if you reach out and say, your career looks really interesting. I'm interested in such and such, and I would love 15 minutes of your time. And often just using that time to ask a couple of smart questions, to listen really well can be enough. I think we often feel a lot of pressure because we all have these sort of spotlights on ourselves when we enter into really any conversation where you're thinking, what can I add to this? What can I say? What intelligent thing can I chime in with? But actually just having that sort of open mind, being respectful, asking a couple of questions can go over really well. People often remember you more when you listen well and make them feel good and smart than if you dominate the whole conversation, which can come off really negatively sometimes. So I would say that to anyone beginning their career, but also mid-career people, work on this as well. And I would also say that the basics are true. So make sure that you're respectful, you make good use of people's time. If they offer up a couple of windows to speak with you, follow up quickly. Sometimes a quick no is better than a slow yes in a lot of different contexts. So just make sure that you do, send a couple of thank you notes or whatever it may be after you have these calls. People remember that, and they will, to Richard's point earlier, when they're hiring, they'll remember the person who was nice to them and asked them a couple of questions and followed up, versus the person who maybe came off as a little bit more entitled or didn't follow up and say thanks. Like, these things matter at all times, but especially now when it is a crowded market.
Mm-hmm. Ellie, what would be an intelligent question that a student would ask you that you would be impressed by, or something that would make you think?
I mean, there are a bunch, and it's going to depend on the roles and that sort of thing. But I would say things like, what do you wish you'd known when you were starting out your career? Or what, if I remember nothing else about your career path, what do you want me to remember? That sort of thing, I think, stands out. Nice sort of open questions, questions that are really about them and their experience, that sort of, without kind of brown nosing, like play to the person's expertise and experience, but does it in a way that is, less like, hey, what do I need to do to get ahead? That can be a little bit off-putting.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we are about to transition into questions from our audience. So for our audience members, if you have questions, if you can actually just put them in the chat, or you can put in the chat, I have a question, and then I'll call your name if you want to ask it on the video. But while I'm waiting for you all to add your questions into the chat or to come up with them, I would love to hear a short answer from the three of you on what, in a crowded market, what is the best way to make yourself stand out from the crowd?
So I think Ellie brought up two incredible points earlier on, when she said, know your audience first off, and number two, to have a tailored CV and tailored resume to the group that you're talking to. And one of the best ways you can do that is to reach out to alumni at whatever company you're applying to. And if you start asking them the kind of questions, how did you get here? What is your daily life like? There's all those smart questions, and really tailor your resume and tailor whatever answers to that, as well as saying to the person, oh, by the way, do you mind if I mention your name in my original application? If you go into most of these web portals, they always say, do you know somebody at this company, and write their name. That's the quickest way that it gets to the top of the pile. And it's a very, very easy way. I know for myself, I've had people ask me if I could introduce them to somebody, and I have. It's easy. You take a CV, hey, this guy looks good. I've spoken to him on the phone before. Would you mind taking a look at his resume? It doesn't have to be this big formal thing. That's kind of how things work behind the scenes with most companies, truthfully. So if you're a little bit more proactive and you reach out to people, that really makes your CV stand out.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I would just add to Matthew's point. I think every once in a while I meet somebody who thinks that networking or getting a referral is somehow not earning it on their own. And I just want to make the point that in these crowded markets, in a government job such as mine, where people tend to stay in their position for sometimes 20 years, there's a lot of concern about hiring somebody that's going to be there for their whole career and not knowing anything about them. So really networking and getting personal referrals is kind of a way to de-risk yourself as a candidate. If you have somebody that's willing to make that step and vouch for you, it's not pulling strings or necessarily asking daddy to do something for you. It's the idea of somebody was willing to put their name on the line to vouch for you. And I think that's why networking and getting referrals is so important. I personally get cold calls on LinkedIn quite often from people wanting to either know about my career or know about impact investing. And I would say one of the things I've noticed from St. Andrews alum in particular is that they are very, very good about, number one, not wasting my time. Number two, coming in and not just saying, oh, tell me what to do. What can I do in my career? They've come in with an agenda. They express that they have done their research on what my organization does. They ask informed questions, and I really appreciate that. And it makes them stand out way more than people that come and just kind of don't have any clear reason why they're there other than they're looking for me to do something for them. And that goes back to my point of people aren't going to do things for you. You have to make it happen. If you go in and prove that you're a go-getter and that you're bringing something to the table, people will want to hire you. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And I'd add to that, just in terms of resumes, LinkedIn, and Saint Connect, which is, if you're not on there, I encourage you all to get on there. It's a really amazing platform, and I think I probably would have found a job a lot faster if it had been around back in my day. But I would say when you think about all of those things and your sort of brand, whatever you want to call it, try and emphasize your achievements in each role or society or club or however you gained your experience over your responsibilities. Like, I can't tell you the number of resumes I look at and it will say, you know, I am responsible for leading such and such. Whereas if you put something in that's basically says the same thing but focuses on the achievements involved, like, you know, led the team from X amount of revenue per year to such and such, or even if it's like just a summer job or just an internship, there are still things you can say that will make you stand out beyond just here's what I did. It's more about here's what I achieved. Like, I started this new initiative. I created a weekly newsletter for the team. Like, however small these things felt to you at the time, they can look really big and really cool and really show that you were an outstanding candidate, even if you had a very small stage from which to shine. So think about achievements rather than just responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, because everybody's coming with, especially right out of their degree, probably a whole host of different experiences, whether that's working at a restaurant here in town or having a really amazing summer internship or leading or being part of student organizations, but being able to pull out what are the things that you've achieved during that time. That makes a lot of sense.
Definitely. And I know you said short answer, but I just thought of something else.
Yeah, that's great. Go for it.
yeah, connect the dots for people on your resume. Like it's so tempting to kind of just put everything on there. Like, I'm great at this and I do this and I do all these other things. And I'm definitely not saying talk yourself down. Like, living in the US for 13 years has taught me to really talk myself up, if you couldn't tell. But connect the dots. So like, what are the things that you want people to stand out on your resume? Like, you see some people have a headline, that's great, as long as it's not too clunky. Even just having a few bullet points, like, these are my three main, I'm really into the rule of threes in communications, but like, these are my three main strengths, or these are like three things that I want you to remember about me. If you remember nothing else, just put them on there. Like, because then the person skimming your resume who is not spending long on it, or your CV, can see really quickly, okay, this is what this person is good at. And often it's counterintuitive, but it's much, much easier to place someone and think of a great connection or role to put them in, or to introduce them to, when they're really specific, versus if they say, oh, I'm a generalist and I'd really just do anything. It's actually really hard to find something for that person, because you're like, well, I don't know where to begin. But if you say, I'm really interested in sustainability, then that's much, much easier than, oh, well, I'm really a generalist.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, questions from anyone? We don't have any questions, and I'll get to Elaine's comment in a minute. Any questions in the chat? But yeah, please. I see AKANE raising her hand, so go for it.
Yeah, that's me. Sorry. I'm Anna. Just wanted to say thanks for holding this. And participating and stuff. You're giving a lot of really great advice. I was just curious about your thoughts on grad school specifically. I know, Richard, I think you mentioned doing an MBA. I was just wondering if that was immediately after graduating, or whether you waited a few years and then went back and did some grad school, and what you would, have any advice on that.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, happy to answer that. I went back for my MBA maybe 5 years after graduating from undergrad. I think business school programs, more than most, want you to have probably a few years of job experience before applying, although not all of them. My point of view on grad school is mixed. I would not have gotten the career that I'm in now and that I wanted had I not gone back for my MBA. But I don't feel that anything I really learned in the grad school program is made me better prepared for it, if that makes sense. So I guess my point there is, grad school can be very expensive, and you need to make sure that the career that you're going to get on the other side is attainable and is going to be, I guess I looked at it from, I got a business hat on, my return on investment. Did my salary go up enough after grad school to pay off going back for the MBA? I also looked at it, I didn't have enough hard finance skills to transition to an impact investing role at the time. I didn't start my career out at a large investment bank. So I was lacking in the hard skills that I knew the employers were going to want for the career that I wanted. While I had relevant experience, I needed to say to people, listen, I know how to do financial statement analysis. I know how to look at a company's books and do that. And so for me, going back to business school was a necessary kind of indicator that I had those hard skills. And it also just helps with the career transition. It's really hard for you to have done one thing for 5 years and then say I want to do something that's on the other end of the spectrum. So grad school can be a pivot point to allow you to refocus and make the case for why you want to transition down a different career path. Mm-hmm. Is that helpful, or does that answer you at all?
Yeah, that is helpful. It is helpful in a way. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Ellie, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Did you want to add anything into that?
Yeah, just really quickly. So I think it does come down to, and first of all, Anna, thank you for joining and for asking the question. I think it really does come down to, like Richard said, what you're going to get from it and when it makes sense. Because one of the things I really liked about the St. Andrews system, I don't know what you're studying, but I did the 4-year undergraduate master's, which is a mouthful and, as you know, hard to describe to people who don't know that type of degree. But I really ran with it and embraced it and said, well, having I did a junior year abroad in the US. So I experienced the sort of US liberal arts education, and I found it was a good experience overall, but I much preferred the sort of ancient Scottish approach in terms of you professionalize early on, like you are treated more like an adult. And I know that sounds terrible and a horrible indictment of liberal arts colleges, but it wasn't a great fit for me. And the reason I bring that up is I started working in this nonprofit, a think tank, and I really emphasized, I was like, it's a non-traditional master's degree, but it's still a master's degree. If I had left after 3 years in the UK, anywhere, I would get a bachelor's degree, and then a master's would be 1 year. And I knew I wanted to get back into academia at some point, but for me, it was just too soon when I was, 22 and just figuring out the start of my career. And this year, I actually enrolled in a business school program, not an MBA, but a postgraduate diploma at Oxford University. It's on pause at the moment for reasons that we're all sick of. But for me, it's been really rewarding and really great timing. And I feel like I'm doing it for the right reasons. It's to help my network. It's because I miss being in an academic environment, but not so much that I want to go kind of all in on it. So I think thinking about your reasons for it and thinking about the timing of it are really crucial.
I would just add on to both Ellie's and my earlier point that if you know that going to grad school for a specific degree is part of your career path, if you've already made up that decision and you know this is absolutely something you want to do, and it's just a question of timing, do I get more experience before going into that? I think certainly you do want to look and say, well, do I think the job market in a year or two might be better than it is now? Maybe the timing does make sense to rearrange the kind of process I had in my head of one before the other, and think about, well, maybe things have shifted a little. I'll still get where I want to be 2 or 3 years down the road, but I just have to reorganize my approach and maybe start with grad school first. I think if that's the question, then absolutely I would consider maybe looking at those timelines and changing your approach there.
Great.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that is really helpful, just because the program I'm thinking of is a 1-year degree. So if it is all online, is it worth it for all of that? And how will the environment be in several years? And will people be hiring more or whatever sort of thing? But yeah, thank you both.
Yeah, thanks for asking a question. Are there others who have questions, would like to jump in with anything? Doesn't look like it. Well, I'm going to kick it back to the panelists then and just ask, do you have anything else that you are thinking of as your, like if you were to put yourself back into your maybe close to graduating self, what advice would you want to give to yourself if you could go back now?
I can start off. When I first graduated, I felt very much like Richard was talking. I didn't want to pull in networks because I didn't want it to feel like I didn't earn it. I didn't want it to feel as if I cheated, because I'm sure there are people who do get jobs that they're not qualified for because of their connections, and I never wanted that over my head. So I went the absolute hardest way possible, which is using zero help. And looking back, I wish I connected with more people. I wish I did networking. You guys have 2 amazing resources open to you, which is the Career Center, which is open, and their job is to help you get a job. Lean on them, take their advice, use their support. Ask them if they can reach out to a company. I'm sure Kristen wouldn't mind if you have any connections at a company that you could reach out to them. And also really lean on your alumni. I've had people ask me through LinkedIn, can you help me? I'm interested in getting into this field. I'm interested in getting into this field. And I really, truly, the alumni does want to help. For the most part, I haven't run into a single person who wouldn't take a coffee or wouldn't take a LinkedIn message, and they want to help. I certainly would tell people, if I could go back and tell myself, I'd be kicking myself, saying, why didn't you network more? Why didn't you meet more people? It's not cheating if you know somebody at the business who went to St. Andrews. Of course not. They want to help you. So I would say use the resources that are available and really don't feel bad about doing so.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, and I would just add to that in terms of networking and everything. I wish I had use the St. Andrews network more. I moved to New York not really knowing anyone, and I joined the Alumni Club in New York just for social reasons, to meet people and make friends and reconnect with people, and that was wonderful. But now I look at where we all are and I think, wow, what an amazing network. I wish I'd used it more then. So I'll reiterate what I said before, like I wish it had St. Connect, and I encourage you all to check it out, because to Matt's point, like no one kind of turns down these meetings for the most part. Like, it's just really nice to hear from someone who went to St. Andrews, and it's such a great network to have at your disposal. So definitely use it. There's really no downside.
Great, thank you.
I guess I don't have too much to add. I think for me, at St. Andrews, I wasn't that active in extracurriculars or other activities. I think I don't necessarily think you have to be, but I think one of the things that can make you stand out is if you're interested in something where you can show that you're developing another skill on your own. Say whether it's if you have time off this summer, don't just spend it. If you don't find your dream job, if you don't get your internship, if you have an offer turned down, don't just spend it looking for other opportunities. Spend it for looking at other opportunities and learning something else. There's so many free online programs. Whether you need to build out those hard skills, take a 6-week free online course in financial modeling, or doing something. I mean, I know everybody's saying that this is an opportunity to take on more skills, and we're all trying to just get by. But I guess my point is if things don't work out the way you planned and you don't have that opportunity, use it to continue to develop something on the side, to say that I'm doing something else to help me stand out from the crowd. It could be just studying for the GMAT or the GRE to eventually go back to grad school someday, but at least you're multitasking and doing two things at once while you continue the job search.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. I just want to add in one last thing kind of to wrap up this conversation. The panelists have talked quite a bit about using your resources and networking. There are a lot of resources that you all have access to that have already been mentioned. So the Career Center absolutely is open and available for you. We are still running appointments throughout the week. And so connect with a careers advisor, connect with me. If you have questions, please don't feel like you have to do it alone. That is absolutely not what you have to do. The alumni office also is available for you. So Elaine has written in the group chat their email, so alumni@St. Andrews. If you have questions about connecting with other alumni, or really anything as it relates to post-graduation, if it needs to come over to us, they'll send it over to us. Yeah, we definitely do that. There is a team that works in the United States as well. So there are a lot of people who are in your court. The last thing I will say is, and Ellie's mentioned this a couple of times, and it's been mentioned throughout the conversation, but St. Connect is available for you. And basically St. Connect is the St. Andrews global online network. And so you can jump in to St. Connect today and start connecting with alumni. There are over 3,000 people who are already on it, and those are mostly alumni at the moment. And so they're waiting to answer your questions and to help you along with your career, just as these three have said over and over again. So definitely jump on to St. Connect. There are links both on the Career Center website and on the alumni website as well. So take advantage of that. I think we've heard plenty of stories about how connection has been super helpful for you three in your careers, and that networking has been pivotal, whether that is you had a conversation that was helpful, or you wish you would have done that because you know it would have been helpful. So yeah, definitely appreciate those. With that being said, thank you to Ellie, Matthew, and Richard for your time and your wisdom today. It has been super enlightening. There are things that I'm thinking about as well. So yeah, thank you for your time and for your effort. And thank you to everyone who has been on the call, who's been participating and listening in. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email and we will get those answered for you. So thank you all. And we will.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you guys.